My grandson laughed while I lay bleeding on the bricks. Weeks later, I watched him scream through the front door glass, the same door I paid to rekey. His key was dead. His smirk was gone. He mocked my fall like I was nothing. So I reminded him who built the house he stood outside of. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The garden had always been Eleanor Barnes' refuge, a place where the perfume of roses carried her back through decades of memories. That morning the sun slanted warm over Charleston's humid air, lighting the dew on her blossoms like scattered glass. Eleanor, 75 and steady despite the years, knelt on her padded mat by the brick walkway, pruning shears, whispering with every decisive snip. The garden smelled of damp earth and salt drifting from the harbor, a blend that always made her feel alive. But one careless shift was all it took. Her knee slipped against the edge of the mat, her shoe caught the looping hose sprawled across the path, and she pitched sideways. The ground rose hard and unforgiving, her hip colliding against brick. A sharp cry broke from her throat, swallowed by the cicadas droning overhead. From the porch came a sound sharper than the fall itself: laughter. Tyler Barnes, her grandson, leaned against the white railing, with a can of soda in his hand, head thrown back, laughing like he was watching slapstick on television. "Oh my God, Grandma," he howled, shaking with amusement. That was priceless. Eleanor's face burned hotter than the midday sun. She pushed against the ground, struggling to sit upright, her palms scraping along the bricks. Pain throbbed in her hip, but worse was the sound of another laugh spilling from the porch. Sophie Clark, Tyler's girlfriend, appeared in the doorway, her phone clutched like a scepter. "Did you see her face?" she cackled. "You should have recorded that." Eleanor's lips pressed thin. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Slowly, deliberately, she gathered her strength and rose onto one knee, the shears still clutched in her hand like a weapon she refused to surrender. Her hat had slipped sideways, dirt streaking her cheek, but she forced herself upright until she stood tall in the garden she had tended longer than either of those children had been alive. "Y'all done?" she asked, her voice sharp as the clipped rose stems at her feet. Tyler only smirked, tapping his soda against the porch rail in rhythm with his chuckles. Sophie nudged him, whispering something behind her manicured hand, both of them breaking into another round of laughter. Eleanor's pulse drummed, heat crawling into her chest. For a fleeting second, she wondered if this was how respect died, not in storms of shouting, but in cruel little snickers on a quiet summer morning. The garden gate clicked. Marion Wells, Eleanor's neighbor and oldest friend, hurried across the lawn, her sandals slapping the grass. At 76, Marion moved with surprising speed, her silver bob catching the sunlight. She bent toward Eleanor, with fierce eyes. "Ellie, you all right?" Eleanor gave a stiff nod, brushing dirt from her skirt. "I'll live." Marion's gaze shot to the porch. "And what's so funny, Tyler Barnes?" Her voice cracked like a whip. Tyler rolled his eyes. "Relax, Mrs. Wells. She's fine." "Fine?" Marion snapped. "You laugh at your grandmother falling? Shame on you both." Her words carried the steel of a schoolmarm, though she'd left the classroom decades ago. Sophie, suddenly less bold, shifted behind Tyler, chewing her lip. Eleanor steadied herself against Marion's arm, but she refused to limp. She would not let them see weakness, not after such mockery. The roses swayed around her, whispering in the humid air like witnesses unwilling to forget. On the porch, Tyler muttered, "It's just a joke." Marion glared at him. "You don't joke about someone who's given you a roof, boy." Her hand tightened on Eleanor's elbow, guiding her toward the shade of the oak. The cicadas hummed louder, or maybe it was just Eleanor's heartbeat in her ears. Her garden, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage for humiliation. But Marion's presence beside her was steady, unyielding. When Tyler and Sophie finally retreated into the house, laughter still echoing faintly, her voice dropped low enough for only Eleanor to hear, sharp as a blade sliding free of its sheath. "Ellie?" she whispered, eyes glinting with something between outrage and calculation. You still own this house outright, don't you? Eleanor Barnes eased into the quiet of her study that evening, the air heavy with honeysuckle drifting through the open window. The laughter from earlier still scraped inside her chest like gravel. She could picture Tyler leaning against the porch rail, Sophie smirking beside him, mocking her pain as though her years meant nothing. Her hand trembled slightly as she opened the oak desk that had sat in the same corner for 3 decades. The drawer creaked, the smell of old paper and cedar oil rising as she reached for the thick manila folder labeled Property and Mortgage. The edges were worn from years of careful keeping, as if her very grip had imprinted itself into the cardboard. She lowered into the high-backed chair, spreading the papers across the desk in neat order. The lamp cast a golden pool over faded signatures and embossed seals. And there it was, the deed. Her name, Eleanor Grace Barnes, written clean and permanent in black ink. Not Tyler's name, not anyone else's. She pressed her palm flat against the paper, a slow warmth blooming in her chest. After so many years of tending this house, defending it through storms and lean winters, she alone had the final say. No laughter, no careless entitlement, could rewrite that truth. Still, she turned every page to be certain. Old mortgage stubs, payoff receipts, a letter from the bank congratulating her the year she burned her last check in celebration. Each document sang the same refrain. Her house, her rules. The clock ticked softly on the wall. Outside, crickets had joined the evening chorus. Eleanor sat straighter, shoulders squaring as though some invisible weight had rolled away. For the first time since her fall, she let herself smile. Her eyes shifted to the phone resting on the desk. She thought of Marian's whisper earlier. You still own this house outright, don't you? The answer was here in her hands. Ownership wasn't just a matter of pride. It was leverage. She picked up the receiver and dialed a number from memory. The line clicked, then a warm baritone answered. Hayes Locksmith, the man said. Victor? Eleanor kept her tone even, though her pulse quickened. Yes, ma'am. Who's calling? This is Eleanor Barnes. It's been a while. A pause, then a chuckle. Well, I'll be Miss Barnes herself. I thought you'd forgotten all about us since you stopped calling me to fix that old garage lock every spring. Eleanor allowed herself a small laugh. That lock gave you steady work for a decade, Victor, but tonight I'm just asking for information. All right then, he said, voice steady as ever. What can I do for you? Her fingers drummed lightly on the deed. If I wanted to change the locks on my house, could I do that any time? Legally speaking. Victor's tone shifted, becoming more deliberate. Is the property yours? Yes, all mine. She glanced down at the papers again, her name bold and irrefutable. Then you don't need anyone's permission, he said simply. If your name's on that deed, those locks are yours to change whenever you please. Something uncoiled in Eleanor's chest, a deep grounding relief. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling beams as if the house itself had just nodded in approval. Thank you, Victor, she said softly. Don't thank me yet, he replied. Depends on why you're asking. You having trouble? Eleanor hesitated. The words of Tyler's mocking laugh still echoed, but she refused to explain everything over the phone. Let's just say I want to be prepared. Victor hummed in thought. Smart woman. Prepared is always better than sorry. Eleanor's lips curved upward. It was the first genuine smile she had felt since collapsing on the bricks of her garden. The papers lay before her like silent allies, each line of ink reinforcing the strength she thought she'd lost. The hum of the crickets seemed louder now, almost like applause outside her window. She closed the folder gently, as though sealing a pact with herself. On the other end of the line, Victor's voice broke the silence. Calm, practical, but with an edge that promised action. Want me to stop by this week? By late morning the next day, Eleanor pushed open the door to Marian Wells' antique shop on King Street, the tiny brass bell above it jingling with a cheerful chime. The cool air inside smelled of lemon polish and aged wood, a relief from Charleston's damp heat pressing heavy outside. The shop was a trove of forgotten treasures, mahogany cabinets, porcelain clocks that ticked out of sync, silver frames reflecting slices of light. Marian stood behind the counter, her glasses sliding low on her nose as she examined a string of pearls. At the sight of Eleanor, she set the pearls aside and leaned forward, her expression already loaded with questions. "Well," Marian said, folding her arms, "judging by your face, I'd say that boy of yours didn't suddenly find his manners overnight." Eleanor managed a dry laugh. "You'd be correct." She lowered her voice, though no one else was in the store. "I called Victor Hayes, asked about changing the locks." Marian's brows shot up, then softened into approval. "About time." The words felt like oxygen. Eleanor reached into her handbag and pulled out the deed folder she had carried carefully, as though it were more fragile than glass. She placed it on the counter and slid it toward her friend. "I wanted to be sure, legally sure. Every page confirms this house is mine. Tyler has no claim." Marian tapped the folder like it was a drumbeat of victory. "Then we've got ourselves the makings of a fine plan. You don't have to explain to him. You don't have to argue. Just lock the doors, Ellie. Let him pound his fists against wood if he wants." For the first time in days, Eleanor exhaled without pain. She scanned the shelves crowded with relics from other people's pasts, things once cherished, then abandoned. She would not let her house become one of them. "I'll help," Marian continued. "I'll sit in your kitchen with a cup of coffee, while Victor changes every lock. If that boy of yours raises hell, he'll have to face both of us." Eleanor's lips curved. "I'd like that more than you know." The bell over the door chimed again, and a young couple wandered in, whispering over a collection of postcards. Marian and Eleanor fell quiet, until the customers drifted deeper into the store. Eleanor's hand brushed the folder on the counter, grounding herself in the weight of paper and ink. "This isn't just about the locks," she said softly. "It's about dignity." "He laughed when I fell, Marian. He laughed." Marian's eyes flashed. "Then it's high time you showed him what strength looks like." That evening, back at the Barnes home, dinner was hardly more than a negotiation. Tyler sprawled at the head of the table as though he owned the place. Sophie beside him flicking through her phone. The aroma of roast chicken filled the dining room, but Eleanor could barely taste a bite. "You'll need to stock the fridge, Grandma," Tyler announced between mouthfuls, his tone casual but edged with command. "We're having people over this weekend. Sophie's inviting her friends too." Sophie smirked without looking up. "Yeah, better make room for mixers and beer. It's gonna be a full house." Eleanor set her fork down, careful not to let her hand tremble. The words stung, not because of their boldness, but because of their assumption that her home was theirs to plunder and parade. She glanced at the head of the table where Tyler sat, oblivious to the storm gathering behind her measured expression. From the doorway, Marian's voice cut through like a knife. She had come by to drop off some quilting scraps, but she paused now, her gaze locking with Eleanor's. A smile tugged at her lips, sly and certain. "By then," Marian said, each word deliberate, "they won't even get in." Dawn spread over Charleston in a haze of gold and humidity, wrapping the city in its sticky arms. In Eleanor Barnes' historic home, the smell of coffee and warm butter drifted through the kitchen. She had risen before sunrise, not from habit, but from anticipation. Today was the day the house would breathe differently, stronger, safer, sealed against laughter that didn't belong. At precisely 8 o'clock, a white van rolled up to the curb. Its lettering, Hayes Locksmith Services, caught the morning light. Victor Hayes stepped out, tall and deliberate, his tool case balanced in one hand. He wore his years well, graying hair, steady shoulders, eyes that never rushed a thing. "Morning, Eleanor," he greeted, tipping his cap. "Morning, Victor," she answered, voice steady though her pulse thrummed. "Front door first." He followed her to the wide veranda, the boards creaking under their steps. The salt air from the harbor clung to everything, even the brass knocker that Victor unscrewed with methodical care. The old lock gave a final groan as it came free, as if protesting the end of its service. Inside, Marian sat at the kitchen table, glasses perched on her nose, flipping through the Post and Courier as if she'd stationed herself as witness to history. "Don't mind me," she said with a grin. "I'm here for moral support and muffins." Eleanor carried out a tray she'd prepared. Blueberry muffins, their tops sugared and golden. She set one beside Victor's tool case. "Payment in advance," she said lightly. He chuckled, biting into one between turns of his screwdriver. "Better than cash." The hours moved with the rhythm of metal and wood. Victor replaced the front lock, then the back door, then the side entrance off the garage. Each new click echoed like a drumbeat of victory through the house. Eleanor followed him room to room, her eyes tracing every fresh glint of brass, her shoulders lifting with every screw tightened. By the time he finished, the house no longer sounded the same. Even the air seemed to shift, cleaner, calmer. "All done," Victor said, wiping his hands on a rag. "No one's getting through these without the new keys." Eleanor accepted the small ring of brass with reverence. She closed her hand around it, the edges biting gently into her palm. For the first time in weeks, she felt ownership pulse through her veins like fresh blood. Marian raised her teacup in a toast. "To new locks and old friends." Eleanor smiled, though her chest trembled with an odd mixture of relief and steel. "And to peace in my own house." The sun was sinking low by the time Tyler and Sophie returned. Their laughter arrived before they did, spilling from the driveway, boisterous and unbothered. Music thudded from Tyler's car as he bounded up the steps, keys jingling in his hand. Sophie trailed behind, a bag of groceries swinging at her side. "Ready for the weekend, babe?" Tyler crowed, sliding his key into the front lock. He twisted. The metal refused to budge. A pause, a frown. He jiggled the key again, harder this time. Nothing. "What the hell?" he muttered. Sophie tilted her head, gum snapping between her teeth. "You're doing it wrong." "I've been unlocking this door for months," he snapped, trying again. The key scraped uselessly against the new brass. He pulled back, tried the knob, shoved his shoulder against the wood. The door didn't yield. Frustration twisted his face, the cocky smirk dissolving. Sophie gave a short laugh, though it carried more nerves than humor. "Don't tell me your grandma locked you out like a teenager." Tyler dropped the grocery bag onto the porch with a thud, tried the lock again, then stalked to the back steps. "Come on, she can't lock every door." But she had. At each entry his old keys failed him. Each rattle of metal turned into sharper curses. Sophie's voice grew shriller with each failed attempt. "Tyler, this is ridiculous. What if she's inside laughing at us?" Inside, Eleanor and Marian sat silently at the kitchen table, listening to the storm building on the porch. The thumps and rattles rolled through the walls like distant drums. Eleanor's heart pounded, but her face was composed. She lifted her teacup and sipped slowly, savoring the victory in silence. Outside, Tyler's patience snapped. He stomped back to the front porch, fists slamming against the wood, voice raw and demanding. "Grandma, open up." The pounding at the front door rattled the stained glass panes, each thud sharp enough to shake dust from the frame. Eleanor Barnes stood in the hallway, her fingers brushing the cool lace curtain that hung over the window. She could hear Tyler's ragged breathing on the other side of the wood, his voice rising in fury. "Grandma, open the damn door," he barked, his words slicing through the humid night. Sophie's high-pitched complaints layered over his, shrill and frantic. "This is crazy. You can't do this to us." Eleanor's hand trembled for only a moment before she steadied it against the sill. She drew a slow breath, inhaling the faint perfume of roses drifting through the cracked window above the porch. Her heart beat like a drum, but her spine held straight. With deliberate calm, she lifted the window just 2 inches, enough for her voice to carry but not enough for Tyler to force his way in. "Not anymore," she said, each syllable crisp as glass. For a split second, silence fell. Tyler's face flushed and slick with sweat, twisted in disbelief. Sophie gasped, as though she'd been slapped. Then the outburst came. "You've lost it," Sophie shrieked, throwing her arms wide. We've been living here for months. This is illegal. You can't just lock people out like trash." From the kitchen, Marion's laughter drifted, warm and cutting at once. "Oh, I think she can," she called out, her tone honeyed with amusement. The sound made Tyler's jaw tighten. He stepped closer to the window, palms pressed flat against the glass, as though he might shove the house itself into submission. "You can't just decide this, Grandma. My clothes, my stuff, it's all inside." Eleanor's eyes didn't waver. "Then I'll bag them for the porch." The words hit like stones. Tyler staggered back a half step, blinking as though he hadn't heard correctly. "What?" "I'll pack your things," Eleanor repeated, her voice steady, "and I'll leave them outside. That's all you'll get." Sophie stamped her foot against the porch, the groceries they had abandoned earlier now spilling from their paper bag, cans rolling down the steps, a carton of eggs cracking open in the humidity. "This is humiliating. Do you even hear yourself?" Eleanor lowered the window another inch, but not all the way. The crickets outside sang in counterpoint to the couple's fury. "I hear perfectly well." Tyler's fist slammed the siding. "This is my home too, whether you like it or not." The claim sent a shiver down Eleanor's arms, not of fear but of cold, hard clarity. She thought of the deed tucked away safely in her desk, her name written in bold strokes, Tyler's name nowhere in sight. She thought of Victor's new locks gleaming in the morning light, stronger than the flimsy respect she had been tolerating. And she thought of Marion, sitting just a few feet away, bearing witness with a smile sharper than any blade. "No, Tyler," Eleanor said softly but with iron beneath. "It isn't." Her grandson froze, his mouth open but empty of words. Sophie nudged him, whispering frantically, "Say something, don't just stand there." But Eleanor pressed forward, her voice lifting like a gavel in a courtroom. "You're not staying here another night." The statement hung heavy in the air, cutting through their noise like thunder splitting the sky. Tyler's eyes went wide, disbelief hardening into rage. Sophie gasped, clutching his arm, her phone already half raised as if to record, to weaponize. Inside, Marion's teacup clinked against its saucer. "Well," she murmured, her grin broadening, "looks like the verdict's in." Outside, Tyler reeled as though the porch itself had betrayed him. He had expected an argument, a compromise, maybe even guilt, but not this, not finality, not eviction. He slammed his fist against the door once more, a wordless howl breaking from his throat. And Eleanor, steady at the window, did not flinch. The night had been a battlefield of shouts, fists against wood, and Sophie's shrill accusations, but morning rose quieter, the garden alive with birdsong and the faint smell of salt carried from the harbor. Eleanor Barnes stood in the hallway with her sleeves rolled, jaw set, and a row of black garbage bags lined neatly at her feet. Her house would not be a storage locker for disrespect. She began with Tyler's room. The air smelled of sweat and Stage's beer, layered over the cologne he used to mask both. The bed was a tangle of sheets, socks on the floor like abandoned rags. Eleanor moved methodically, tugging open drawers, folding shirts not with tenderness but with efficiency. Each item dropped into the garbage bag with a dull thud. "This should have been done long ago," she muttered, knotting the first bag tight. From the doorway, Marion leaned in, arms crossed, her sharp eyes sweeping the chaos. "Good Lord, Ellie. It looks like a fraternity yard sale in here." Eleanor allowed a quick smirk. Not for much longer. Together they worked. Tyler's hoodies, jeans, sneakers, all scooped, bagged, sealed with the sharp pull of duct tape. The plastic swelled with his life, stripped of the comfort he had taken for granted. The sound of tape tearing echoed like final verdicts in a courtroom. Next was Sophie's corner of the house. Eleanor marched into the guest room, where Sophie had staked her claim with glittering bottles of perfume and a battlefield of makeup palettes spread across the vanity. The air reeked of floral sprays layered too thick. "These get boxes," Eleanor said firmly. Marion retrieved flattened cardboard from the closet. Together they folded, taped, and filled them with heels, dresses still tagged, eyeshadow palettes lined like ammunition. Marian shook her head as she packed a pile of stilettos. She brought more shoes than books. Figures. The tape squealed again, sealing Sophie's things in their cardboard coffins. By late morning the hallway was crowded. 4 bulging garbage bags and 3 taped boxes stacked like a wall of exile. Eleanor wiped sweat from her brow, her blouse sticking to her back in the sticky Charleston heat. Yet, with every sealed bag, her chest grew lighter. "You sure you want to do this yourself?" Marian asked, handing over the last strip of tape. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Resolute. "If I don't, I'll always feel like they still live here." The final bag knotted shut with a sharp tug. Eleanor and Marian each carried 2 to the porch, the weight heavy but satisfying. The boards creaked as they set them down in a neat row beside the steps. Cardboard joined next, stacked firmly on top, labeled in black marker SOP. The sun was high when the sound of tires screeched into the driveway. Tyler's car door slammed. Sophie followed close behind, her voice already pitched with disbelief. "What the hell is this?" Tyler demanded, striding up the porch steps, his eyes locked on the heap of bags and boxes, confusion sparking before fury. Eleanor, standing in the doorway with Marian just behind her, folded her hands calmly. "Your things. I told you they'd be waiting." Tyler's mouth opened and closed, his arrogance suddenly colliding with reality. "Garbage bags. You packed my stuff in garbage bags." "They were the only thing strong enough," Eleanor replied evenly. Sophie let out a screech that pierced the humid air. "You're humiliating us. Do you have any idea what this looks like?" She kicked at the nearest box, her perfume clouding the porch as the cardboard shuddered. Marian stepped forward, unbothered. "Looks like freedom to me." Tyler turned back to Eleanor, his face red, his fists clenching. For a heartbeat, silence stretched, the birdsong gone, the cicadas quiet. Then he leaned close to the screen door, his eyes sharp as broken glass. "You'll regret this, old lady," he snarled. All through the night Eleanor's phone buzzed like a hive of hornets. Angry vibrations rattled against her nightstand, the glow of Tyler's name flashing again and again in the dark. Marian, who had insisted on staying over, stirred in the guest room but said nothing. The walls were thin and the venom in Tyler's voice carried even through voicemail. "Unbelievable." His first message spat. "You think you can just throw me out? I'm your grandson." The next one was more venomous, laced with curses that made Eleanor's stomach tighten. By the 5th message, his voice had cracked into rage, calling her cold, heartless, and worse. She sat propped against her pillows, the house quiet except for the hum of cicadas outside. With each buzz, each new recording, she felt the sting lessen. Regret never came. Instead, a quiet strength rose in her chest like a tide. At dawn, she slid the phone into her hand, scrolling through the string of voicemails. One by one, her finger pressed delete. Each soft chime was its own release, like cutting dead blooms from a rose bush. By the time she reached the last, the screen went still. Silence filled the room, vast and calming. Downstairs, the aroma of coffee reached her first. Marian was already in the kitchen, robe tied snug, hair pinned back in its usual tidy bun. She was buttering toast, as though the previous night hadn't been punctuated by threats. "Morning, soldier," Marian greeted, her tone brisk. "Didn't sound like you got much sleep." "I slept enough," Eleanor replied, settling into a chair. "What I didn't do was listen." Deleted every word. Marian's eyes gleamed with pride. "That's the Ellie I know." They sat together, the clink of butter knives and the warmth of toast anchoring the morning in normalcy. Yet Eleanor's hip ached, reminding her of the fall that had started it all. By mid-morning, Dr. Anna Lewis arrived for her house call. The doctor was brisk but kind, her stethoscope swinging against her chest as she crouched to examine Eleanor's hip. "Just bruised, doctor," Lewis confirmed after a careful press along the bone. "No fracture. You'll be sore for a while, but nothing permanent." Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Good," she said quietly. But Dr. Lewis tilted her head. "You don't look relieved." Eleanor's gaze drifted to the window, where the roses bloomed defiantly in the late morning sun. The bruise will fade. What stung more was the laughter. My own grandson, standing there laughing at me on the ground. Marian's hand covered hers instantly, fingers warm and steady. That's why you locked them out of more than doors, Ellie. The words struck with clarity. Eleanor realized it was true. Every bag, every taped box, every new lock had been less about Tyler's threats and more about reclaiming what his laughter had tried to strip away. Dignity. Doctor. Lewis packed her bag, giving Eleanor a long, thoughtful look. You did what needed to be done. Sometimes the strongest medicine isn't what I give, it's what you decide for yourself. When she left, the house settled back into a comfortable hush. Eleanor and Marian spent the afternoon with the windows open, the sound of gulls from the harbor mixing with the rustle of leaves. For the first time in weeks, Eleanor felt a sense of peace creeping in. But peace is fragile. That evening, as the cicadas rose again in their endless chorus, Marian gasped from her seat in the parlor. She was scrolling on her phone, her glasses perched low on her nose. Ellie, you need to see this. Eleanor set down her teacup and leaned over. On Marian's screen, Tyler's name glared above a post written in bold, reckless words. Guess Grandma won't need her house much longer. The tea went cold in Eleanor's hand. By morning, Tyler's venom had trickled across Charleston like rain through cracked shutters. His late-night post, Guess Grandma won't need her house much longer, had reached family friends, church acquaintances, even old colleagues Eleanor hadn't spoken to in years. Her phone buzzed with texts and calls, the tone always the same, a mixture of worry, gossip, and disbelief. Ellie, are you safe? One friend whispered over the line. We saw what Tyler put online. Do you need somewhere else to stay? Eleanor stood at the kitchen window, the garden beyond bathed in honey-colored light. The roses swayed gently, steady in their bloom, indifferent to rumor or cruelty. She drew strength from them, answering each question with the same unshaken truth. This house is mine. I'm not going anywhere. Still, whispers have weight, and Charleston's cobblestone streets carried them like echoes. By Sunday morning, the air in St. Matthew's Church hummed with speculation. Eleanor entered in her pale blue dress, her cane tapping lightly against the stone floor, Marian striding at her side like a guard dog in pearls. The congregation shifted as she passed. Heads turned, eyes flicked to her, then quickly away. Some offered pitying smiles, others traded murmurs. Eleanor lifted her chin, her hands folded neatly around her hymnal. Let them talk. When service ended and the parishioners milled about the courtyard, the questions came sharper. Ellie, is it true Tyler was kicked out? He says you locked him on the street. Eleanor paused beneath the wide oaks, Spanish moss trailing like gray lace in the breeze. Yes, she said evenly, because it's my house. My name is on the deed. Tyler has never been anything but a guest. A hush rippled through the crowd. The certainty in her voice struck harder than anger ever could. Marian, never one to miss a cue, raised her own voice so it carried to the far end of the courtyard. And I saw the papers myself. Ellie owns that home outright. Tyler's lies are just that, lies. The effect was immediate. A woman who'd been whispering behind her bulletin turned scarlet. A man who had nodded along to Tyler's story shifted uncomfortably. The weight of rumor began to collapse under the sturdier weight of truth. By the time Eleanor reached her car, she could feel the tide turning. Tyler's version of events had cracked. In Charleston, reputation is currency, and his account was bankrupting fast. The next afternoon, Eleanor sat on her front porch, a porcelain teacup in her hand, the steam curling into the sticky summer air. For the first time in weeks, peace held its place. Across the street, neighbors passed with polite waves, some pausing to compliment her roses. She noticed Sophie on the far sidewalk, head lowered, sunglasses shielding her face though clouds covered the sun. Sophie clutched her phone like a lifeline, avoiding eye contact as if Eleanor's gaze might burn her. Eleanor sipped her tea slowly, watching the young woman hurry past. Guilt, it seemed, was not as fashionable as Sophie's designer heels. Marian joined her on the porch, carrying a plate of shortbread cookies. You know, she said with a sly grin, Tyler's story is unraveling faster than a cheap sweater. Half the town knows better now. Eleanor nodded, her lips curving faintly. Truth doesn't need shouting. It stands just fine on its own. The garden rustled in agreement, a breeze stirring the roses. The air smelled of salt and earth, grounding her. For a fleeting moment, Eleanor allowed herself to enjoy the calm, the sound of gulls in the distance, the clink of porcelain, the steady beat of her own heart. She had stood firm, and the world was beginning to see it. Then the phone rang. Not the flutter of a text this time, but the solid, purposeful chime of a call. Eleanor set down her teacup, wiped her hand against her skirt, and answered, "Eleanor Barnes," a familiar voice asked. It was Helen, her attorney, steady as stone, and twice as precise. "Yes, Helen." There was a pause, paper shuffling faintly on the other end. Then the words came, calm but carrying weight. "You want to formalize eviction paperwork?" The tea on the porch went suddenly still. The morning Eleanor walked into Helen Caldwell's office, Charleston was hushed under a gray sky. The French Quarter's cobblestone streets glistened faintly from an early drizzle, and the sharp scent of the sea drifted between the narrow alleys. Eleanor's cane clicked steady against the wet stone, Marian at her side, as if the weight of her decision needed a witness. Helen's law office sat in a restored brick building, its windows trimmed with black shutters. Inside, the air smelled faintly of leather-bound books and fresh coffee. Helen rose from behind her mahogany desk, crisp in a navy blazer, her eyes warm but sharp. "Ellie," she greeted, taking Eleanor's hands. "I got your call. Let's set this right." The words struck with more comfort than Eleanor expected. She sat across the polished desk, smoothing her gloves while Marian perched close by, arms folded, a hawk ready to swoop if needed. Helen opened a slim file and slid a stack of papers forward. "This is the eviction filing. Once we submit, it creates an official record. Tyler won't be able to claim he was ever more than a guest in your home." Eleanor glanced down at the documents, her own name printed clean and certain, like it had been on the deed. She took a pen in her hand, its weight cool, and signed where Helen indicated. Each stroke of ink was another brick in the wall she was building between herself and Tyler's entitlement. "Now," Helen said, leaning back, "to be clear, Tyler has no legal rights here. None. He's not on the deed, not on the mortgage, not on any rental agreement. He's just squatting. The law is on your side, Eleanor. Absolutely." The words steadied her more than any cane could. Eleanor felt her lungs expand, as though the stale air she had been breathing since the fall was finally clearing. Marian gave a satisfied hum, tapping the table with her nail. "That's what I like to hear." Helen looked to her. "Would you mind signing as witness? It always helps to have someone who's seen what's been happening." "With pleasure." Marian scrawled her name in a confident flourish, as though she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. Helen gathered the papers, clipped them neatly, and rose. "I'll file these with the clerk's office immediately. You'll be on record by the end of the day." When Eleanor stepped outside again, the drizzle had shifted into light snow, a rarity in Charleston. White flecks drifted across the cobblestones, dusting the iron balconies and settling on Marian's shoulders. People paused along the street to tilt their faces upward, marveling. Eleanor stood among them, her breath clouding in the air, feeling oddly reborn. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like a woman under siege. She felt like a woman who had taken her house back brick by brick, signature by signature. "See that?" Marian murmured, slipping her arm through Eleanor's. "Even the heavens are putting their stamp on it." They walked slowly toward the corner, Eleanor savoring the sound of her cane tapping against wet stone, each click lightened by a freedom she hadn't known she was missing. At the curb, Helen joined them briefly, her phone in hand. She spoke quickly to someone on the other end, her professional tone calm but insistent. Eleanor only caught pieces. "Delivery address confirmed. Tomorrow morning." When Helen hung up, she looked directly at Eleanor. Her expression was steady, but her words cut with finality. The sheriff is scheduled to deliver official notice to Tyler. Eleanor froze, the snow stilling on her coat sleeve. Marian's eyes went wide, lips parting in delight. Tomorrow the law itself would knock at Tyler's door. The knock came at mid-morning, sharp and official, echoing through the old hallway. Eleanor Barnes opened the door to find Sheriff Daniels standing square on the porch, his uniform crisp, his gloved hand clutching a folded sheet, sealed with the county's emblem. The winter air carried the faint tang of brine from the harbor, sharp against Eleanor's cheeks. "Mrs. Barnes," he said, with a respectful nod. "Per the court, I'm here to serve notice of eviction to your grandson." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the doorframe, but her voice was even. "Go ahead, Sheriff. The door is yours." With deliberate care, Daniels unfolded the notice and taped it to the glass pane of the front door. The red lettering screamed against the white paper, bold enough for any passerby to read: "Eviction notice, effective immediately." His pen scratched a signature beneath the printed seal, the sound final as a gavel. When he stepped back, Eleanor felt a quiet swell of justice. Not vengeance, not bitterness, just truth, written in ink for all the world to see. "Thank you, Sheriff," she said. "Stay safe," he replied. His boots thudded against the porch steps before fading down the street. The paper flapped lightly in the coastal breeze, an unyielding sentinel. Tyler arrived less than an hour later, Sophie close at his heels. His laughter was loud, false, the kind that cracked at the edges. "Oh, this is rich," he sneered, stepping onto the porch. "She called the cops on me? Really?" Sophie yanked off her sunglasses, her voice already pitched with fury. "You've embarrassed us in front of the whole town, Eleanor." Tyler leaned close to the door, smirking at the notice as if it were nothing more than a prank flyer. "Guess what?" he said, voice low and mocking. "Paper doesn't scare me." In one sharp motion, he ripped the eviction notice clean from the glass. The tape snapped, the edges tearing in his fists. He crumpled it, tossing the wad onto the porch like trash. Inside, Eleanor was ready. She lifted the small camera she'd tucked in her apron pocket and clicked. The shutter snapped, capturing Tyler mid-defiance, the crumpled notice still in his hand. She clicked again, as his sneer twisted into rage. Through the glass, their eyes locked. Eleanor didn't flinch. Sophie cursed, stamping her heel against the porch. "You think this is funny? Do you have any idea what you've started?" "On the contrary," Eleanor murmured to herself. From the kitchen, Marian clapped her hands once, sharp and satisfied. "Perfect evidence," she declared. "Judge won't need to hear a word more than those photos." Tyler shouted something Eleanor chose not to hear. She let the camera hang from her wrist, turned from the door, and walked calmly back toward the dining room. The muffled sound of Sophie's shrieks followed her, but they might as well have been gulls crying oys of the harbor, loud, pointless, far away. By evening quiet had returned. Eleanor sat on her porch, wrapped in a shawl, a glass of red wine catching the last embers of sunset. The roses were bare for winter, their thorny canes black against the twilight, but to Eleanor they looked like strength, sharp, unyielding, alive beneath the frost. Marian sat beside her, a second glass in hand. "We should frame that picture of him ripping the notice," she said dryly. "Maybe hang it in the hallway. Call it Portrait of Entitlement." Eleanor chuckled, the sound low and free. "Or maybe I'll just keep it in a file for Helen." They clinked glasses, the soft chime blending with the night's first chorus of cicadas. Later, when Eleanor set her glass in the sink and reached for her phone, a new message glared across the screen. Tyler's name, his words short, jagged, a final threat carved into glowing pixels. "I'll take what's mine, one way or another." Eleanor's hand stilled on the counter. The wine's warmth in her chest gave way to a colder weight. The first crash came just after midnight, shattering the silence like a gunshot. Eleanor Barnes jolted upright in bed, her heart thundering against her ribs. Outside, the wind carried the briny scent of the harbor, but beneath it came something sharper, the metallic scrape of keys against brass. Her hand reached for the lamp, flooding the room with warm light. She listened. Another rattle, harder this time, followed by a frustrated grunt she knew all too well. Tyler, Eleanor slid from bed, her hips still sore but steady. She moved through the hall, the shadows of portraits stretching long across the walls. At the front door, the knob jerked violently, metal clanging as Tyler shoved his weight against it. "Open this damn door," he bellowed, voice raw with rage. "You think you can lock me out? This is my house too." The locks held. Victor Hayes' handiwork resisted every slam, every frantic jiggle. The sound was thunderous, yet Eleanor's pulse slowed instead of quickened. Calm settled over her like armor. She picked up the phone on the hall table and dialed. 911. "What's your emergency?" Her voice didn't tremble. "This is Eleanor Barnes on Church Street. My grandson is attempting to break into my home. Please send officers." As she hung up, Marian emerged from the guest room in her robe, hair loose around her shoulders. She didn't look frightened, only furious. "That boy's going to bring the whole house down," she hissed. Outside, Tyler roared again, fists hammering against the wood. "You can't do this to me. I belong here." Sophie's voice cut in, shrill but broken. "Tyler, stop. Please, they'll call the cops. You're making it worse." "I don't care," Tyler shouted, but he did care. Eleanor could hear it in the crack of his voice, the desperation bleeding through arrogance. He sounded less like a lion, and more like a cornered animal. Within minutes, red and blue lights washed across the windows. The sirens wailed briefly before cutting off, replaced by the crunch of boots on gravel. A commanding voice boomed, "Charleston Police, step away from the door." Through the glass pane, Eleanor saw Tyler freeze. The officers approached, flashlights sweeping over his furious face. Sophie clung to his arm, mascara streaking down her cheeks as she sobbed. "Please, Tyler, just listen." One officer planted himself squarely in front of him. "Sir, this is not your residence. You need to leave immediately, or you'll be charged with trespassing." Tyler's chest heaved, his fists clenched, then loosened. He tried to speak, but the words sputtered into nothing under the officer's glare. Finally, with a guttural growl, he turned away, storming down the steps like a child denied candy. Sophie stumbled after him, crying apologies to no one in particular. The squad car idled until their figures vanished down the block. Then one officer knocked gently on Eleanor's door. She opened it just enough to see his steady eyes. "You did the right thing, ma'am. Call us again if he comes back." "Thank you," she replied softly. When the lights faded and silence returned, the house seemed to exhale. Eleanor leaned against the doorframe, her breath shaky but not weak. Marian placed a hand on her shoulder, firm and grounding. "You were unshakable," Marian said. "I almost enjoyed watching him squirm." Eleanor managed a weary smile. "Almost." They sat at the kitchen table until the clock ticked past 2, sipping tea, letting the tension drain. Outside, the city slept again, the air heavy with salt and the faint rustle of palm fronds in the dark. Just as Eleanor was ready to retire, her phone buzzed with a new message. This time it wasn't Tyler. It was Helen, her attorney. "Ellie, after tonight we should discuss your will. Cutting Tyler out completely might be best." The glow of the screen painted Eleanor's face pale blue. Marian, reading over her shoulder, let out a low whistle. "Well," she said, "that's a door worth locking too." The morning air in Charleston carried a crispness rare for the coastal city, a breeze that whispered of change. Eleanor Barnes stepped carefully along the cobblestones of the French Quarter, cane tapping a steady rhythm beside her polished shoes. The pastel facades of historic buildings loomed in quiet dignity, much like her own heart, scarred but upright. Helen Caldwell's office welcomed her again with its scent of lemon polish and books. Marian walked beside her, fussing with her scarf as though daring anyone to object to what was about to be done. Behind the desk, Helen looked up, her sharp eyes softening when they fell on Eleanor. "Ellie," Helen said, standing, "I assume you've thought over what we discussed." Eleanor set her handbag on the desk with deliberate weight. "Yes, I don't want there to be a shred of doubt. Tyler is to be removed entirely, not a cent, not a keepsake, not a mention." The words landed like iron on oak. Marian's lips curled in satisfaction. That boy will choke on the silence of it. Helen nodded, pulling a new file from her drawer. Then we'll make it official. You'll need to choose new beneficiaries. Eleanor didn't hesitate. The Charleston Garden Club. They'll use the funds to keep the city blooming. And Marian Wells. Her gaze flicked to her friend, who looked startled for the briefest second before her eyes softened with gratitude. She's stood with me through all of this. She deserves recognition. Marian blinked rapidly, pretending to busy herself with adjusting her scarf. Well, she said lightly, though her voice wavered, I suppose antiques don't polish themselves on loyalty alone. Helen smiled faintly, already typing. That's more than enough justification. Once I draft, we'll sign, and it will be legally binding. The process was meticulous. Helen's pen scratched over paper, her fingers tapping against the keyboard. The room filled with the hushed sounds of decisions being carved into permanence. Outside the tall windows, a church bell tolled noon, the deep chime rolling through the streets like a reminder that time once passed cannot be reclaimed. At last, Helen turned the document around. The new will lay before Eleanor, bold and unflinching. Tyler's absence on the page was louder than any name. Eleanor picked up the pen. Her hand trembled only for a moment before she steadied it. The tip pressed down, black ink flowing into her signature with the same resolve she had carried since the day Tyler laughed at her fall. Each letter written was a strike against cruelty, a monument to self-respect. When she set the pen down, the silence was reverent. Marian placed her hand over Eleanor's. You've done more than lock him out, Ellie. You've erased the last door he thought he had. Eleanor met her friend's eyes. He expected legacy. He earned nothing. Helen gathered the documents, sealing them into a folder. That's it. Final and binding. Tyler has no place here, not in your home, not in your estate, not in your legacy. A weight lifted. Eleanor rose slowly, her cane clicking against the polished floor, her lungs filling with air that tasted new. The office door opened to the French Quarter again, the crisp breeze washing over her cheeks, carrying the scents of roasted coffee from a cafe nearby, and the faint salt of the harbor. For the first time she walked out not as someone defending herself, but as someone who had already won. Marian linked her arm through Eleanor's as they strolled down the uneven stones. What do you want to do now? She asked, voice lighter than it had been in weeks. Plant tulips. Eleanor answered without hesitation. Something that comes back stronger every spring. Marian laughed softly, the sound mingling with the chatter of tourists and the gulls above. The city seemed to hum with possibility, but the peace shattered when Eleanor's phone rang. She fished it from her handbag, expecting Helen with some detail left unfinished. Instead, the name on the screen made her pause. Sophie Clark. She answered cautiously. Sophie? The voice that came through was raw, broken by sobs. He's gone. Sophie choked. Tyler, he left me too. Eleanor stopped dead in the middle of the street, the world around her carrying on as if nothing had changed. The phone trembled in Eleanor's hand as Sophie's sobs rattled through the line. For weeks Tyler's voice had been all fire and fury, but now it was gone, replaced by a hollow silence on the other end. He's gone. Sophie wept. Packed up, drove off, didn't even leave me bus fare. I don't know where he is. He said I was dead weight. Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. For a fleeting second, pity brushed her chest, then faded. Sophie had laughed too, standing smug on the porch that day. Eleanor fell. Entitlement had been her fuel. Now it burned her. I'm sorry, Sophie, Eleanor said quietly. The words were true in tone, though not in spirit, but he's made his choice. The young woman sniffled, then hung up, leaving only the sound of gulls crying outside Eleanor's open window. That evening, Eleanor and Marian sat on the porch with glasses of sweet tea, the ice clinking like chimes. The air was damp with the promise of rain, magnolia blossoms heavy on the wind. Marian raised her glass toward Eleanor, her silver bracelets catching the light. To peace at last, she declared, and to locking out the storm before it ever broke your windows. Eleanor clinked her glass softly against her friend's. For the first time, the toast didn't feel like defiance. It felt like victory. She sipped, the tea cool against her tongue, and let the moment settle into her bones. Marian leaned back with a grin. You've done more than take your house back, Ellie. You've carved your name into it again. Tyler can rage all he wants, his claws can't scratch deed paper. Eleanor chuckled, the sound surprising even herself. It's a different kind of inheritance now, Marian, not something he can squander. The next morning she dressed carefully and walked to the bank. The marble floors echoed under her cane as she met with a teller to wire a donation. A generous portion of her savings money she had once thought Tyler might inherit was instead signed over to the Charleston Garden Club. They'll plant new beds by the Battery. With this, the director promised over the phone later that afternoon, her voice glowing with gratitude. Your gift will keep the city blooming long after we're gone. Eleanor ended the call with a steady hand. Let Tyler chase shadows. Her legacy would bloom in petals, not fists. Back home, she traded her dress shoes for gardening clogs and stepped into the yard. The earth was damp from last night's shower, rich with the smell of loam and rain. Eleanor knelt carefully, easing tulip bulbs into the soil one by one. Marian joined her, passing spades and wiping her brow with the back of her hand. The sun broke through the clouds, warming Eleanor's shoulders. Birds sang overhead, the faint sound of church bells drifting from downtown. She pressed dirt over the bulbs and smiled at the thought of spring, of color rising where laughter had once mocked her. Imagine it, Marian said, brushing dirt from her palms. Come April, a whole stretch of tulips. Neighbors walking by, pointing, saying, that's Eleanor's garden. That's the legacy he lost. Eleanor sat back on her heels, breathing in the earthy perfume. Her laughter spilled out, light, unforced, genuine. It rang across the yard, stronger than Tyler's had ever been. For a moment, she felt entirely untouchable. That evening, as the last streaks of orange faded from the sky, the phone rang again. Eleanor answered, expecting another thank you from the garden club. Instead, Sheriff Daniels' voice came through, clipped but calm. Mrs. Barnes, it's Daniels. I thought you'd want to know before you heard it from someone else. Eleanor's grip on the phone tightened. What is it, Sheriff? He cleared his throat. Your grandson, Tyler. He was picked up downtown this afternoon, caught shoplifting from one of the boutiques on King Street. Eleanor's breath stilled. The image of Tyler, arrogant, laughing, convinced the world bent to him, crumbled into one of a boy cornered under harsh fluorescent lights, pockets stuffed with things that weren't his. The sheriff's voice lowered. Seems he's losing more than just a roof. Eleanor looked out over her garden, where the soil was freshly turned, tulips waiting to rise. Her laughter from earlier lingered on the air, but now it mingled with something sharper. Justice, unexpected and complete. The morning after the sheriff's call, Eleanor Barnes woke with the sharp clarity of someone who had already won. Tyler's name now belonged in police blotters, not in her home. She laced her gardening shoes, pulled on gloves and stepped into the backyard with Marian at her side. The air was soft with humidity, fragrant with damp earth and roses that had stubbornly held their bloom even through winter's edge. Today, Marian declared, setting down a flat of begonias, we plant, not plot. Eleanor smiled, a far better use of our hands. They knelt side by side in the soil, trowels clicking against stones, palms stained with dirt. The ground was cool, pliant after a week of rain. Eleanor pressed bulbs into the earth with care, covering them gently, patting the soil as though tucking in children for sleep. The sound of footsteps on the sidewalk drew her gaze. Neighbors strolling their dogs slowed to watch. One waved, another leaned over the fence, calling, Eleanor, those roses of yours look better than ever. They've had good company lately, Eleanor replied, glancing at Marian with a wry smile. Compliments came like sunlight, warming her more than she expected. People stopped, asked about the tulips, admired the row of sprouting daffodils. What once had been the backdrop to humiliation, the place Tyler had laughed as she fell, was now reclaimed, celebrated. By midday, the news of Tyler's arrest had already made its rounds. Charleston thrived on whispers, and King Street merchants were quick with tongues. Marion reported it gleefully as she pressed another plant into soil. They say he tried to steal designer sunglasses, Marion said. From all places, a boutique with 3 cameras pointing straight at the register. The clerk said he strutted in like he owned the place. Eleanor brushed dirt from her gloves, shaking her head. He thought the world was his porch. And now, Marion replied, dusting her knees, the porch belongs to the law. Word spread faster than weeds. That evening, neighbors knocked on Eleanor's door, not with questions but with support. We heard about Tyler, one said. His face pinched with disapproval. It's a shame, but you did right. Others came offering pies, sympathy, and relief that the truth was now plain. Through it all, Sophie was conspicuously absent. 2 days later, Eleanor noticed the small moving truck parked outside Tyler's old hangout spot. Sophie loaded boxes alone, her movements brisk, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses. She didn't look toward Eleanor's house once. By afternoon, she was gone, leaving behind nothing but a faint trail of perfume on the street. The days that followed unfolded like gifts wrapped in calm. Eleanor spent serene afternoons pruning roses, their fragrance drifting into the open windows. She brewed tea in porcelain cups and read novels on the porch, while gulls circled overhead. For the first time in years, she heard her own house breathe, quiet, undisturbed, at peace. The garden thrived under her steady care. Tulip shoots broke through soil with green determination, and the roses unfurled as if rewarding her persistence. Marion often joined her, bringing iced tea or gossip from the antique shop. They laughed in easy rhythm, their voices mingling with the hum of cicadas and the rustle of magnolia leaves. Who'd have thought, Marion said one afternoon, sipping from her glass, that peace would come not with silence, but with flowers. Eleanor chuckled, her hand trailing over a fresh bloom. He laughed at dirt, but dirt gives back, if you treat it right. Her laughter carried across the garden, unforced and free. It was the sound of a woman who had claimed her home, her name, her joy. The phone rang as twilight painted the sky in gold and rose. Eleanor set her teacup on the porch railing and answered. Helen's voice came steady, professional, but tinged with finality. Eleanor, I wanted to let you know your will has been filed with the court. It's official. Tyler is out forever. The last traces of daylight caught the roses, making them glow as if lit from within. Eleanor's hand tightened around the phone, her eyes on the garden she had built and rebuilt, her legacy safe in roots and ink. The Charleston morning unfurled, warm and salt-touched, light spilling across Eleanor Barnes' backyard. Hose in hand, she stepped onto the garden path, her cane leaning forgotten by the porch rail. Her roses, bold with spring, lifted their heads as if awaiting her inspection. She bent carefully, water hissing over the soil, and stood again with no falter in her hip. The steadiness filled her chest like triumph. Moisture clung to her forearms, droplets glittering as the sun climbed. Cicadas buzzed in the live oak above, gulls wheeled overhead, and the air smelled of blossoms and brine. Eleanor inhaled deeply and felt the morning breathe back. A white van turned the corner, its paint catching the light. Hayes Locksmith Services. Victor Hayes slowed, one arm resting on the window. "Morning, Miss Barnes," he called. His smile was as calm as the man himself. "Morning, Victor," she answered, wiping her brow. He held up a brass fob stamped with a palmetto tree. "For your key ring. Call it a charm. Not everything about security is bolts and screws." She walked to the fence and accepted it through the slats. The charm was cool and solid in her palm. "Then consider me doubly locked." Victor tipped his cap. "Keep enjoying your house. It suits you better this way." His van rolled on, tires humming down the cobblestones. When she turned back, Marion Wells was waiting on the porch with a pitcher of iced tea so cold the glass sweated. "Hydration first," Marion declared. "Gardening victories second." They settled into wicker chairs with their drinks. Ice clinked, condensation pooling into little rings on the table. Eleanor sipped the lemon-sweet tea, savoring the cool rush against the warmth of the morning. You know, Marian said, bracelet sliding on her wrist, peace looks good on you. It feels like fresh paint after a storm, Eleanor replied. From the sidewalk, a neighbor slowed his walk to wave. Eleanor, those roses are the talk of the block. Another voice followed, healthiest I've ever seen them. Compliments that once embarrassed her now lifted her. She glanced at Marian. They're thriving because no one tramples them anymore. The phone rang inside, sharp against the hush. Eleanor rose, cane still untouched, and crossed the hallway that smelled faintly of beeswax and soil carried in on her clothes. She answered, expecting Marian's shop or the garden club. Eleanor? Dr. Anna Lewis's voice was brisk but warm. I've got the last X-ray results. Eleanor braced, though she already felt the truth in her body. Tell me. Bruise gone, bone solid. You're cleared. Climb stairs, prune roses, walk the cobblestones. Just no marathons. The doctor teased. Relief spilled through her chest, light and sharp. Then you've given me back my feet. No, Dr. Lewis corrected gently. You took them back yourself. When Eleanor hung up, she lingered by the phone a moment, letting the words settle. Then she returned to the porch, where Marian read her expression instantly. Good news. Officially unbreakable. Eleanor's laugh carried across the garden, startling a bird into flight. The afternoon passed in small pleasures, trimming dead stems, sipping more tea, listening to the rhythm of the city drift over fences. Tourists' chatter, a dog's bark, the clang of a church bell, all of it belonged again. Eleanor reached into her pocket, fingers brushing her new ring of keys. Brass teeth gleamed, the palmetto fob catching sun. She turned them slowly, the weight grounding her. So much noise had filled her life. Tyler's jeers, Sophie's shrieks, threats scratched out in text messages. Now the sounds were simpler. Water on roses, cicadas, the small applause of ice cubes in a glass. Marian leaned back in her chair, eyes half closed. Keep a spare with me, she said. Not because I expect trouble, because I expect tea, and sometimes your hands will be full. Eleanor smiled. On one condition, you knock anyway. Marian grinned. Every time. The sun slipped low, painting the house in copper light. Eleanor stood at last, key ring still warm in her hand. She stepped inside, paused at the door, and slid the new brass key into its lock. The tumblers lifted, smooth and obedient, until the latch clicked home. A sound small as a whisper, sure as a vow. She smiled, steady on her feet. The sweetest sound wasn't laughter. It was the click of my own key.